For this episode, I go on the road, really on the road, 600 plus miles away to Laurel, Maryland. I will be talking with Donald Grant, who is a caretaker and tour guide at Montpelier Mansion, a home built in 1787 by the Snowden family, who were plantation owners and the owners of an ironworks in Prince George's County, Maryland, in the 1700s and into the 1800s. This will be about history and the creativity of working in historical preservation.
This is the tour of Montpelier with Donald Graham.
And what is Hidden Spaces?
Hidden Spaces is, we have the basements, the attics that a normal person foreign won't get to see. I take them down there because they're kind of, and it needs to be a smaller group, and they basically got to be out here.
Yeah.
So if you like to, and I talk about some of the things, the construction techniques, the preservation, the things that it changes, those all the the history of the house, and so and the just on the something. Talk about this. Talk about a thing called dendrochronology, which is how we discovered the construction date to confirm the construction date of the house, because the actual documentation was very limited on when this house was actually built. We had family stories that turned out to be mostly wrong. And then we had, up until the late 70s, the history said the house was built in 1740 and the wings were added in the 1780s. No, it was all built in 1780s.
Okay. So it wasn't actually pre-revolutionary.
It's not a colonial mansion, but as those who know stats have referred to it as a truly American home because it was built after Yorktown, or the construction as they started after Yorktown.
Okay.
So, but it's the house is colonial style architecture. In fact, that it's Georgian architecture, which is usually noted by symmetry. And this house is symmetrical in its design. It's five-part. It has a pretty much square central block where the family did most of their living, entertaining, sleeping, with bedchambers on the second floor and parlor, dining areas, and so forth on the first floor. Now it had also wings attached, or sometimes some refer to them as outbuilding, but it's all connected by hyphens that come off the center block, one each east, north and south side, and then is connected with larger wings that function as service areas for the house. We are right now in the south wing, which was the kitchen. Okay. We know that it's quite different, and because the original build being service areas, they were not as elaborately decorated with architectural details as the center pond. So the wing we're in the south wing was a kitchen, and it was quite different than what it was at that time, because in the early 20th century, there were major renovations done by the owners of the time. One extension was put off one of the south wing that ran towards the west, and it was put on to providing modern kitchen and probably smaller servants' quarters at the time. But was the original colonial original kitchen for the house was changed to a larger dining entertainment space. And it was quite extensive because it would have had a large cooking hard fireplace. It was actually taken out. The fireplace was moved back slightly. The room was actually 2 rooms with probably a cooking area on the one side and possibly a fireplace with a laundry some function on the backside, going up to the gable wall. The other wall of the house is semi-octagon, three-sided shape. That if you looks quite, if you look at it from the outside, it's a kind of a flare. It's also matched by another Maryland home in Annapolis called Hammond Harvard House that then they used to attribute. And the Hammond Harvard was designed and built by a somewhat famous architect named William Bowen. And for years, they attributed him to at least the wings of the house. But further research determined that these wings and the whole house was constructed always 10 years after his death. So, but so when you visit Montpelier, you kind of have to look at it as a house that was continuously occupied and saw many changes, although there's a lot of detail, particularly in the center of the central walk, that dates to its construction in the late 18th century. So we, try to make that clear to people as a tour of the house. So the room we're in right now is the south hyphen, and basically it was simply used to connect the central block of the house to the south wing. It would probably not have much of a elaborate interior, probably just lined with extra chairs and furniture that might have been needed to bring into the dining room or for guests if they were entertaining. And they supposedly entertained quite a bit because this was sort of not in a city situation. It was out in the country. So people may be traveling from Alexandria to points north. Baltimore would be one place about 20 miles north, but Philadelphia a little further. Now, Baltimore, when this house was built, was not a major city. It was a small port town. It would explode in the early 1800s, but at the time the house was built, as Washington, we know, stayed here twice. This probably would have been a day's ride from Alexandria, or his home about Vernon was about 10 miles south of Alexandria. So it was probably about a day's ride. So him stopping here on his way to the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787, very logical. We know that Washington would have known Major Snowden as a producer of iron because Major Snowden provided iron to keep the Continental Army, because we have a great deal of documentation on that. And Washington also would purchase iron from the Patuxent Iron Works, which was Major Snowden's company in ironworks. And we know he purchased a ton of it to have delivered to Alexandria, where he certainly would go to be used at Mount Vernon by his blacksmiths there. He would also, later on, Major Snowden would send him a plow that his workmen would produce, blacksmiths and his carpenters would produce at the ironworks. And Washington wrote a letter back thanking him for the plow, asking him to send a request for payment. And he also asked him to produce another one so we could basically copy it by his blacksmiths and workmen and at Mount Vernon, so he could put it to general use on his plantation. So,
well, let me ask you, what is it about here that there is an ironworks?
Right in this area, there is large deposits of what we refer to as ironstone, but it's if you looked at the foundation of this house, it's worked before you get to the brick on top of it. Foundation stones are we call ironstone is orange stone, and that orange stone denotes the iron oxide, or would be broken down in the smelting process and produce a wall of a crude pig iron. and that's what the furnace would produce. It would have to be worked and the impurities taken out in a second process to actually use for products that they would be what farming convince, things that we have still here in the house, firebacks particularly, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. It was one of their products, but it was basically usually produced in ingots of about 100 pounds. And it's called pig irons because it'd be shaped, these little channels that they would be feeded into to produce coming out of the foundry. And you would have be like a sow's pig, the geese.
Okay.
And that's why it's called pig iron.
Okay.
So
Very earthy idea.
yeah. And we actually have an example of one down in our iron exhibit. An interesting story of that. It was embossed with the Tucson ironwork on top of it it was fished out of James River down in Virginia.
Yeah.
A number of years ago, and so, but it also has the date 1747 on it. So it was a very old thing, but it was found.
So even before this house was built, they were doing.
The ironworks was actually started by Major Snowden's grandfather in the 1730s. He was partners with a couple other people who would eventually be bought out over the next 50 years. And by the time Major Snowden's would build his house, he was almost the sole owner of the ironworks.
That's interesting because growing up here in this area, you don't think of this as a place that would have had ore or iron or something like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting, this whole area. One of the things we have nearby here that's part of our park history referred to as Dinosaur Park, and it's actually, they discovered a dinosaur bone bed from, I believe, the Cretaceous period. And they just recently pulled out a large, with these grandies of 5 only for a dinosaur. He was about 3.5 foot long. Wow. And it's because of over time, and this area supposedly was, in that period, was more like the Louisiana Bayou.
Yeah, more swampy. Yeah.
So
Okay.
Produced.
Makes sense.
And also part of that process, also what ends up producing the ironstone that goes into iron.
Okay.
So
Interesting. Okay. Boy. Well, let me just say that I lived here till I was 18 years old, and I didn't know a lot of stuff about the area. I learned more about it after I left. So, okay.
you just entered into the formal dining room in the central block of the house. So most of the architectural details you see here are from the late 18th century, maybe some embellishments slightly into the early 19th century, extremely early 18th century. But describe some of the labyrinth. The cornice molding is egg and dart and dental, more combination of dental mold and going around where the walls and ceiling meet. The male is very nice, sort of one of our architects who did a structures report described it as it's almost a Chinese motif for both. Now, the thing that most people will remember is built-in china cabinet in with corn, with columns that rise up to almost to the ceiling with the Corinthian carving where he has at the top. So very attractive, and on each side of the cabinet, and the scallop shelving from the inside. Currently, we're using it to house a number of china pieces, but it would have been probably the showpiece of the family entertaining visitors in their dining. So the house gets some changes in the furnishings plan. the idea is there is a winter dress and a summer dress. Now, we kind of mix and match a little bit these days. So we have only a visitor come only once. So we try to show everybody what the different pieces are. This room doesn't get that much of a change. Slip covers go on. As far as a sofa in the dining room, because this was also used to entertain, usually after the men and women at the finished dining, men would stay in the dining room and the women would draw to the parlor or someplace else to have their discussions, and men would pretend to do their discussion.
Did they smoke?
Remote.
Yeah. Since this was, along with being the ironworks that he made money off, it was tobacco place.
Tobacco was an important crop. They were probably, once they cleared the fields to provide the cure for forage, they were probably putting the plow to tobacco. And now tobacco is a very hard crop on the soil. So they might only gotten 1 or 2 years, if they were lucky, of a good first-rate crop or tobacco that they would get the highest price at market. So, and after that, it was probably less and less, and just to a point where it just was profitable. Then they probably would have went to a grains or something with the soil and same material that to producing that ironstone. It also has, surrounded by ironstones, is clay.
Yeah.
The as you move south of Maryland, on Maryland's western shore, the soil gets better, and that's why tobacco was so big even up into the 20th century in southern Maryland, and continue until this, the 60s was smoking if you had fashion, right? So a good number of those people down there still were tobacco farmers. I worked with tobacco farmers in my early career who had formerly owned the farm, and then when it stopped being profitable, they went to work for Parks Barb and doing landscape work. So they were tough old birds. But tobacco is the whole process is very laborious and involving hanging the tobacco in barns where the temperature up top is 125 degrees. So, but the tobacco could also be, because Major Snowden had almost 50,000 pounds of tobacco in his inventory at his death.
Wow.
You could have been used as barter for his iron. His cash wasn't as readily, hard cash wasn't readily available. A lot of it was built, the economy based on credit, the crop of the next year being on the put forward as credit towards the purchases they're making current. So, and as the barter system, that tobacco, next year's tobacco from a farmer was traded for iron who was produced now. So it's a different economy than what we have bricks. We had to deal with today, with plenty of cash available and credit to pay for things. So most of the if you come here, the furnishings, the house, since the house kind of doing it a little bit of a timeline, the Snowden family built the house in the 1780s, but through the 19th century, the wealth somewhat declined, and by 1888, the house and surrounding land was sold out of Anna. It would change hands a number of times over the next 40 years. Some people lived here. There were people who just bought it as land speculation and did not live here. But the last private owner buys the house in foreclosure in 1928. His name was Breckinridge Law. He was a big Democratic donor and supporter of Franklin Roosevelt. In fact, he ran for the Senate in Missouri, U.S. Senate in Missouri twice, was defeated both times. but still was a Democratic supporter and was supported Roosevelt. And when Roosevelt is elected in 1932, he gets the appointment of ambassador to Italy and served that term from 1933 to 1936. He buys, as said, he bought the house in 1928 and primarily used the house to house him and his wife's antiques collection, was extensive. So when he more than likely got the house, it was fairly empty because just the number of owners and no snow pieces because that would have been dispersed out at their half for sale in the 1880s.
So none of this furniture is original.
One qualification to that is we have had some of the ancestors donate a couple of pieces back to us. The problem is there were other Snowden houses in this area, and the provenance does not tell us. They say we're in this house.
Okay.
So the dining room table that is here in this dining room is a Snowden antique, but we don't know that it was in this house. The case was also we have a card table in Harlem that was donated by Snowden. It was actually shipped down to us from Nova Scotia. So that shows you have the family's dispersion over the years. But that, again, we don't know for sure. K2 was from this house.
Do you think, this might be a hard question, you think some of their dispersion and decline was due to the end of slavery?
Well, they cease to be in the iron business. They sell out of that, their interest in that, by about 1820.
Oh, okay.
So they were the son of Major Stone who built the house. He was involved in starting the mills in the town of Laurel, along the Tuxet, which still exist, or now the mills don't exist, I'm sorry, but some of the housing for the workers, and that is where the Laurel Historical Society houses their operation out of, and they're open for tours too. It's basically a house where 4 families lived with a shared kitchen, and they were all workers of the mill. So but he's involved in that, and he has a house in Laurel. He would eventually inherit this house, and it's actually his inventory from 1831 and his death that we base a lot of the furnishings that are in the house on, because it's sort of the indication is the inventory takers were going through the house room by room, and you can kind of group things together and say, okay, this was here. They refer to a turkey patterned carpet, and what we're standing on is a reproduction of turkey would have been what their designation on the Middle Eastern pattern.
Okay.
So,
okay.
And so it's that's what this represents. Yes. So there's this in this dining room and in the far next there are the same pattern. Yeah, and this was a pattern that was available in the early 19th century. The company had the Jacker Farms from Balloons, so they were able to reproduce that pattern. And this was done in the old style, and then I think it's 27-inch width. So we had to have a technician from it stitch the patterns together. And there's really not that many people who can do that. This was an older guy who done years and run years and years. So
this room looks pink. I don't know. It's
we saw it Pepto-Bismol pink.
Well, I was going to say, but I didn't want to put it on the recording. But since you said it, it is somewhat reminiscent of Pepto-Bismol. Poor Pepto-Bismol. But I would assume they would have called it a rose.
Possibly it was a color. One of the
but this is the color.
Was it a color that we know for sure was in this room? No, because in the early 20th century, when they were doing a lot of this other work, updating the wings, adding the addition, they did a major stripping of the existing plaster and the existing wood paint on the woodwork. So it made it difficult to do paint analysis, but they were able to find some little corners that didn't get stripped and to get the colors on the woodwork. The walls are conjectural based on what a family of the Snowden's wealth could have afforded that. And the vibrant colors were more expensive. The pigments were just that much more. So this pink, it would have been an expensive color. The green that is in the hallways, our central passagery, also an expensive color. So that's the.
Was it more common for them to use wallpaper? I mean, I say that because
this is wallpaper.
Oh, okay.
This is paper, but they did not have the technology to do continuous rolls like we do.
Okay.
So this was laid in squares of approximately 15 inches by 12 inches, and they're overlapped. Doesn't show up as quite as.
Yes, I see. Yeah, it does. It does right here. It shows
gaps right here.
Yeah.
So that was another sign that they could afford paper, a painted paper, and underwears. Even though some people might look and say, why didn't you just paint walls?
Yeah. They wouldn't have had drywall.
Yes, it would have been painting right over plastic.
Right. Okay. Interesting. All right, because I say that about the wallpaper at Hermitage in Nashville, where Andrew Jackson lived, and somewhat later than that, but not early 1800s. It's wallpaper, and they can go back and find what wallpaper and reconstitute that. Yeah. So, but I mean, it's designed wallpaper. So, floral design. Let me add, we've walked into a first floor bedroom with a very high bed, and it's quite charming. And there's a little door with a winding staircase. What's the story on that?
Well, in a house of this Georgian style, of this size, a secondary staircase was typical for servants. This particular one just simply goes from this first floor bedroom to the bedchamber on the second floor, and it goes no further into the basement or the attic. So, but it was for servants, but probably used very commonly by the family if they wanted to get quickly. I always imagined if it's a cold 19-degree day, that staircase is probably the warmest place in there. That's because it's right next to a chimney.
Okay.
And then in those cases, all the chimneys all the fireplaces would be just working and heating the house and still not keeping the house very warm by our standards today. But so it's a very tight winding staircase. I usually, when I'm doing tours for younger people, I said, well, imagine have to carry a tray of food up to there, the enslaved, or even worse, carrying a chamber pot down that staircase and the trouble you would have if you spilled.
Oh, yeah.
So it's, probably it was practical reason to have a secondary staircase, but but typical. This one isn't what everybody remembers, is because at some point, although there's reason to believe that it wasn't always this way, it's been built back into the panel wall of the house. So if you close the door, we keep it propped open. You didn't know it was there. You would just look past and through the solid wall. The mysterious hidden staircase.
Right. Yeah.
But that is somewhat might be disappointing. Tell people it probably wasn't always like that.
Yes. And to be loyal Americans, they have a lithograph, I guess, of George Washington there on the.
It was a very common lithograph available at the time of the 1800s. The particular reason, because Washington did stay here twice, that they probably could use it to point that out to visitors, having it here. But we also have a small lithograph of Abigail Adams on the opposite wall. Now, Abigail Adams also stayed here in there. Here. The story behind that is they're just opening the White House in 1797. Her husband, John Adams, has just been elected. She's traveling from New England with her entourage to come live at the White House. She had stopped in Baltimore. The people told her about the Stone's house and that the people typically would stay that wealth, that status would have stayed at the Stones on their travels. Being a New Englander, and wasn't a typical thing in New England, staying in people's houses that they did not know. She shied away from that, and she told her driver when she passed here to just keep pushing on. We'll try to make Washington by nightfall. Well, the story is Major Snowden, and we know this from her letter, came and chased her down on the road, pleaded to her saying the road is too bad, it's at dark, and you don't want to try to travel it at night. Please come back to our house. And he convinced her to come back and to stay here. And she wrote in a letter to her sister. She was described the fine house that she was stayed at, and was treated with true English hospitality. So she's very complimentary. So that was the other famous person who visited here that we know of from documentation. The funny thing about the next paragraph of that letter to her sister, she writes it when she's in Washington, and she describes how seedy the only shopping area she has to work with, which is Georgetown. Which people who are familiar, Georgetown is a ritzy Washington area right now, but she's describing it as a seedy house, seedy place to be. And
yeah, that's interesting that the culture would have been. I mean, this would have been considered the Confederacy in the South, and southern part of the country, although I think I live in the South, but this is still part of the South.
This was as much the south of Baltimore. You're not looking at too much, and the Eastern Shore of Maryland was all Southern sympathy.
Yeah,
I had a docent who described that Abraham in 1860, Abraham Lincoln got one vote in Prince George's County.
Oh, okay. Oh wow. So Abigail Adams, I mean, she's very interesting. But what I was going to say is about the travel. I mean, we just get in the car and we can get to, we were in Alexandria yesterday, and it took half hour or so. We get there or 40 minutes to get there from your area, off almost at the Chesapeake Bay. Yeah, near Annapolis. And for them, though, it would have been a day's trip going with horses 5 to 10 miles an hour, I guess.
It would have taken the best part of the day for her to get from here to where the White House is on the roads at the time, because it would have been just ruts carved out of the woods for the most part.
Well, I always think of that old statement, and I don't remember. People used to say it was William Faulkner, but it was another guy who said history is a foreign country. They do things differently there. And so that's why it's so fascinating to find out people didn't live like we do and have podcasts. So.
We just walked into the central passageway, which basically, if Georgian architecture, if we could fold this house over on ourselves, and the center of this passageway would mirror the side, the opposite side. This is a fairly large space. It's oriented east to west, and probably was chosen that way if you open both doorways here, you could probably get a nice cross breeze going on through here.
And there are opposite doors.
Doors. The one facing east faces the Patuxent River, which today is dammed up 2 spots to the north. Now, people not familiar with Maryland geography, Patuxent starts 20 miles north of here, and then about 80 miles south of here eventually dumps into the Chesapeake Bay and is quite a substantial river. To this point, boats could travel up the bay, go up the Patuxent, and get as far as a town, Upper Marlborough, maybe even Queen Anne, which are a little bit farther north, but that's still about 20 miles south of here. Mm-hmm. So large ships, even at the time, could not get up this far. There's just too many shallow spots. So Queen Anne was supposedly about the farthest a ocean-going ship could get up. The Snowdens had to move their iron out, so they more than likely moved it out on barges down to a place where they could be transferred over to an ocean-going ship. Now, before the Revolution, iron product, the Snowdens were mostly designated to be shipped back to England because that was part of their arrangement. I guess it was referred to as mercantilism, where raw goods were produced in this country and raw materials were produced in this country, shipped back to England, finished goods there, made there, and shipped back to us to sell at a profit.
Because we didn't have factories.
We didn't have factories.
Pre-industrial revolution.
Pre-industrial revolution. They were starting their industrial revolution about 70 years before us. Mm-hmm. But after the revolution, the Snowdens started doing finished goods like plows that he sold to Washington and probably other things like hinges and farm implements, because Washington also ordered a dozen farm shears when asked for the additional plow.
Sorry.
Where can I find paper towels?
I noticed that although the wallpaper in here is green, a kind of a more pleasant color, probably by our standards, a sea-ish green, sea ball first. Do what? Seafoam green, yeah. That it has the same thing with the overlapping edges of the paper. It's interesting, more visible here.
Yeah, actually all the paper in the house is overlapping. Even when we go in parlor, which is a block printed or cabbage rose wallpaper, it is laid in overlapping squares also.
And that's very large, though, is the thing, because they're not long. We think of long pieces.
Right.
Okay. So this would have been used for ventilation and just for people coming in? And
probably, if there was an overabundance of guests, they probably could have put the tables out to feed the deer in the central passageway. Probably if they had no room in the bed chambers above, and they wouldn't have been unusual for 6, 7, 8 people sleeping on those bed chambers, that they would have mattresses, ticks on the floor where they would sleep, and upstairs or downstairs. So they would have made do.
Right.
Yeah.
People were not as particular about sleeping with other people back in those days.
Correct. It was the kid, the idea of, well, whose room is this? And I'd say it would be many people's, because if the kids, they might have had as many as 6 kids and 2 to 3 beds in one of our bed chambers up there. And once sleeping is done, they were not.
You don't hang out.
They weren't hanging under.
You're out there.
We've just gone into the library wing of the house. It's one of the, you have a hyphen and a wing that corresponds to the hyphen and wing that was over on the other side of the house that served as a kitchen. This was believed to be the plantation office and office for the Ducks and Iron Works that Major Snowden would have worked out of. Right now, it has been redone in the early 20th century as a library, so it had bookshelves completely surrounding the exterior walls. All that would be, as I said, added in the 20th century. Particularly, we know that from photographs done as part of the Historic American Building Survey in the 1930s. It was a New Deal project that the Roosevelt administration was sponsoring to put artists and photographers to work. And one of them, they would go to historic houses and photograph and document the current conditions. Well, we have pictures of this room showing it through these bookshelves completely filled. And supposedly the last private owner had one of the largest privately held law library collection in the countries. That was a part of it. And now if you were to look at those photographs compared to now, it's pretty sparse. But again, it's not the what was originally the function of this room. I'm in talking about Long. If somebody was interested in researching or know the name Long, he is somewhat notorious for in the history of the Holocaust. In fact, he was mentioned in Ken Burns's "The U.S. and the Holocaust" documentary that came out several years ago. Long, during World War II, was put in charge of Assistant Secretary of State in charge of immigration policy for the State Department. So basically, he was following somewhat up on the tendency that had been since the end of World War I of closing down immigration into this country. Well, he took it a step further, and he instructed his consulates to throw up every roadblock possible and grant in visas to this country, especially coming out of Eastern Europe, which in turn limited the availability for Jews fleeing Nazi takeover of countries to immigrate to the U.S. And he continued that policy up through probably 1944, when at that time, the information of the atrocities that were happening were becoming public, and his actions were somewhat of considered an embarrassment at that time. So he was relieved of his post, and at that time he went back into private life to the rest of his life. But it's sort of a darker history to the house, just his ownership during that time, and he gets if somebody knows about that and they come here, sometimes we've actually had people who are somewhat offended that but we don't. We know about his history. We talk about it, but we don't praise his ownership. We're not here to glorify the ownership of any of the owners of this house, because we have slave owners in this house. If you go to the ancestors of the builders of this house, they were in the slave trade.
Oh, wow.
One thing I did not get into earlier and is the gentleman who started the Ducks and Iron Works in the 1730s also was a co-sponsor of a slave ship that went to Angola and transported over 200 slaves. Some were taken to England, some were taken to Barbados, and a number were brought back here, about 80, we believe, for your ship records, were brought back here to the Annapolis area, and may have actually ended up working in the ironworks that are right here. So there's a plenty of dark history mixed into this site and going backwards before the house was built. And we try to bring that out in anybody who visits the house. So that's kind of put that out there.
Okay.
We've gone up the staircase, and we're on the second floor, which I believe mostly is bed chambers, and the size of the rooms mirror the size below. So if you were right now or in the central hallway, which is just about as wide as the central hallway downstairs, and so there are currently 4 bed chambers. We don't furnish all of them. We only have 2 furnished right now, because it would just be more or less a replica of each furnishings. But some of the interesting things is we're looking at a room right now where the hidden staircase comes out to into the second floor. So in the 20th century, to create a full bathroom for the house, they actually built a wall in the back part of the second floor central passage, and it was a full bath for the house. It also had doorways into the 2 east-facing bed chambers, and so originally, when the house was built, the central hallway went all the way to the exterior wall, where now you have a small room created that was formerly a bathroom. All the fixtures had been removed, so it's now just really a storage room for us. But one of the interesting things in the second floor is one of the things we believed pretty positively that was produced at the Tucson Iron Works is the firebacks. Now, firebacks were basically just big slabs of iron put in the back of the fireplace to protect the brick and also help radiate heat out into the room. And on 2 of the firebacks have the initials T, A, and S above, which we believe stand for Thomas and Ann Snowden, the builders of the house, and the date 1783, which with other information we have might just correspond to the date they were actually able to move into the center block of the house, with the plans to build the wings, hyphens and wings immediately still in the works, and it probably were completed up to maybe 3 to 4 years later. So there's actually two that had the identical type firebacks with the date on it. The one east facing room and the west facing room on the south side of the house. So,
And you have here, you've got a spinning wheel, and you've got a yarn, the wool yarn turner, and you've got a little loom. So would those have been in this part of the house, or is it just they're just put here?
Or just exhibit. Okay. We're using it in an exhibit space. They could have been in a space like a bed chamber, along with several beds to work on things, loom type projects. More than likely, something like that might have all been in a part of the kitchen too.
Right there.
And we have a bed chamber that it really contains pieces that had been donated to the house that were Snowden pieces that don't really fit into our time frame, which stops at 1831, that inventory of Nicholas Snowden's property. So all these things fall just outside of it, like the bed is a Snowden donation, but just it's more about us 1850s. But we use it to illustrate. We have a trundle bed underneath that particular bed, so which would have been typical to be able to, have a bed to store under there, which wouldn't not necessarily have been used by just children, but any adult could have probably used a trundle bed like that.
And the mattress is a kicking mattress, but it's over the bed springs are ropes.
Yes.
It was very, very primitive there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you
It's a lovely
look,
quilt,
there's
though.
actually a key tool on the bed that shows how they would have gone in to tighten the ropes after they sag. So they would have to twist it out, retie it, and so it would hold up. And probably that was something they probably had to do weekly or every couple weeks to keep the rope when the rope starts sagging.
Donna, let me ask you, a home like this, where would the next one be? You mentioned Annapolis, of this kind of a size at that time. Plantation home.
Well, it could have been the comparable ones were, and it's hard to say comparable because there were homes of decent size of farmers that are still in existence. A lot of them in private hands.
Oh,
But this might be, and this was a grand home by all standards at the time, but other wealthy planters, maybe not quite as wealthy, would have been probably within 2 to 3 miles of the house. Now, the Snowdens actually had probably within a 5-mile radius of this house, had probably about 6 houses of family members who, that were grand houses, not quite as grand as this. In fact, the one is still in existence just a mile up Route 197 called Snow Hill. It was actually belonged to Major Snowden's uncles. And then there's another one called Oaklands, which is probably a mile and a half away. There is the first Snowden home that they called Birmingham Manor that was built before this. It's burned in the 1890s, but it was within a mile of here.
okay.
Foundation still exists on what is now Patuxent Wildlife Refuge property. Snowden Hall was probably 2 miles at tops. Walnut Grange was probably about another 3 mile away. So there was a number of Snowden family homes, somewhat less than in grander than Montpelier. That in some of them, most of those still exist. But you have other important homes that were of wealthy planters. There was Bel Air Mansion, what's referred to as Bel Air Mansion now. It was owned by one of the governors of Maryland, and it's in the city of Bowie. That's comparable to this house.
Okay.
Somewhat less. There is Riversdale, which is down by what is the University of Maryland now in the town of Riverdale. It was actually the son of the builder of Riversdale, donated 400 acres to the Maryland Agricultural College, which became the University of Maryland. He donated in the 1840s, and it would eventually be the University of Maryland. So it is a greenhouse, different in art style, somewhat in the interior than Montpelier. Although from the exterior, it looks a Georgian style. Going inside, it's more of a European design because it has like 3 salons along the center of the hallway. Central hallway runs parallel to one side of the house, and there's 3 large salons on the first floor that look out what would have been out over a somewhat of a lake, from what reports had. The interesting thing is that has a tie to the French Revolution. The builder of that, or at least who started the house, was an aristocrat fleeing the French Revolution that now appeared that it was working its way into Belgium. He came to Philadelphia in the 1790s, then moved down to this area and started to build this house. Well, it would end up he was going back, and by 1801, he was going back to Belgium to keep a claim on his properties. He left it to his daughter, Rosary Steer, who married a Calvert, a descendant of the Lord Baltimore famers. So she continues, and she was writing letters back and forth to her family in Belgium. When there's a collection that we sell called Mr. Seversdale, where she is discussing with her family what she was doing to the house, and her problems with dealing with the slaves, her dealings with other families in the area. She was not a fan of Jefferson when he comes to the thing. He thought these ideals were not in keeping with her view of her aristocratic upbringing. So she somewhat made fun of him in the letters. But that's kind of a local historical house here in Prince George's County, Maryland. It sort of has ties to world history and what was going on outside. So sometimes you can look at the local history and then tie it back into the national, and we do that somewhat here. Even though this particularly Snowden families did not appear political, there was no, to our knowledge, no members who even got into the general assemblies or were governors or during any service, public service or politicians. They seemed to be businessmen, very focused and very successful in the business, but not politically active.
And so the Snowdens first came to Maryland area
Well, the first Snowden comes to Maryland, we believe, in about 1658. And he comes in as an indentured servant, which meant he had no money.
Yeah.
Basically, he came over and he signed a contract with the ship's captain to transport him over to this country. And the ship captain, in turn, sold that contract to a established planter, and which committed this Snowden, his name was Richard Snowden, to 5 to 7 years of service, with basically room and board, to that planter. And the problem with that system is two problems, actually. The temperature and conditions here in Maryland were much different than conditions in England they came from. The humidity, mosquitoes. So the seasoning process took out about half of the indentured servants who came over. And the problem is, a lot of times the indentured served out their terms, but then the planter says, "Well, you're free to go, but I don't have any land to give you." And that was usually part of the contract. Or give some land to get them started on. A lot of times, planter just said, "I don't have anything to give you. You're on your own. You're free." And so there were discussions of his stories of freed indentured servants wandering the land looking for handouts to survive, or possibly even signing themselves up again for more indentured.
or becoming criminals.
The jails were in Annapolis they said were full, and they were pretty.
Yeah. I guess it could have gone to cities if there were cities.
There were in the 1600s and even the early 1700s. Not too much was in Maryland was in the way of city. Annapolis doesn't really get started until the 1720s. And that's Baltimore really didn't exist besides maybe a fishing, boat making area. So there was no cities. It was all individual small planters spread out through acres.
It's interesting, especially looking at it today. Yeah. So Richard Snowden did what?
Richard Snowden was fortunate that his master apparently did give him what was promised, But his probably best thing was he married his master's stepdaughter.
Oh.
And so he put himself in the family, and his son, who was also named Richard, apparently did well, got involved in early was also doing somewhat in the iron business, because he purchased with some gentleman named Thomas Linthicum tract of land referred to as the Iron Mine down in this area of South River. So they were probably doing something with iron too. And his son would in turn start the Patuxent Iron Works in the 1730s, and which put him on the way to his son. That third Richard had a son named Thomas, and it was his son who's Major Thomas, and would eventually inherit most of the ironworks. So it was a story of success through each generation.
Yeah.
And improving their lot each one.
Okay. Now, he wasn't really a major.
He was a major in the Prince George's County militia, which then the militias as groups, from what I understand, did not fight in the Continental Army. As now, members of that militia may have went to fight in the Continental Army, but they would get underneath. They would wouldn't be recognized as the militia from Prince George's County. Apparently, von Steuben, who was training the troops, didn't think much of the militias. He wanted them trained in his and European style military tactics. So he would take over at that point, and they were formed from that. But to our knowledge, Major Snowden did not fight in any battles or go away. He was probably focused on the iron trade. He was selling iron to the Continental Army, so that was helping with the war effort in its own way, of him being here to manage the ironworks.
Mm. And probably got him some money too.
And yeah, you could say, well, we might call him a war profiteer today.
Yeah.
Well, it's also called him a patriot, because if the British win, he loses his family ironworks. Yeah. They would have confiscated it.
Yeah, that's interesting, because he could have been, and just decided to be a loyalist, a Tory. Yeah. There are a lot of questions I'd like to ask you, Donald, but I think the one that we'll finish with here is, you did not grow up or major in history in college. Living around this area, history is all over the place in a lot of ways, but a lot of it we didn't know about. So how did you become the expert on this building and the history of this area as you have become?
Well, it's more just, I consider good fortune on my part that I always had an interest in history. As far as education, I wasn't able or chose not to go to college right out of high school. I went to work, and I went to work for the Parks Department in the county we are in, Prince George's County, and doing just labor type work, landscape work, right out of high school. Well, about 7 years into it, during the time I was going to college part-time, but at a very slow progress towards any type of degree. But in about 1985, an offer came that Montpelier at the time was mostly, it was in the development of a historic house museum. They had just finished a restoration project that brought the house, did paint and some structural beef up, and also added air conditioning to the house. So they, and up till that time, they had a caretaker living here. And one of the wing that was added on in the early 20th century was pretty much used as a caretaker's quarters. It had been that pretty much since the Parks Department took over the house in 1962. So the gentleman who had been doing it up till that point had decided he needed some more advancement. He wasn't getting it through what he was doing. So he decided he was going to go back to work regular maintenance. And the how job was offered to me as coming here, living here, managing the events that were here, mostly weddings at the time, and also helping out the group of volunteers who were giving tours and doing other things for the public. It was a very limited thing and not necessarily with any professional or historical guidance. So I came here and I was able to work with this group. They were lovely people, but they not necessarily, as I said, they were women who were interested in history, but didn't really have the educational or academic chops to run this up. Now, during this time, schools are starting to produce as like George Washington University, graduates in master's programs of museum education and other, and it becomes a professional field. And to fit that, all those people couldn't go into major museums like the Smithsonian or the Walters in Baltimore and like that. So these historic house museums started looking for these type people. Now, I didn't have this type of degree, but I think I had the ability, if I wanted to get that type of degree. My interest in history was strong. I was researching everything available about what had been done with this house and what professional research had been done. So I was looking at all that and other outside sources of historic houses of the early American the colonial time and early American history. So it just as an education over the years, I just learned more and more until I got to the point where I became somewhat the expert on this house, the history of this house, because I had the time to devote to it and was right there and could sort of research it out. So I was stayed here until 1995. At that point, I was honestly needed more money because the job wasn't paying. So I worked with the upper management and hired a person who had graduated with a degree in museum education, and she became the manager of the house and did quite well. She continues to this day, and she's very close to retirement as the manager. But around 2010, I decided I was having some health issues. I needed to cut back a little bit. I've been in construction for about 15 years and probably needed something a little less stressful. So she offered a part-time job and I said, okay. And I came back. And for the last 15 years, I've been helping with all aspects of the management of the house, and a lot of it is dealing with historic preservation with this house, efforts that, in my construction background helped me with the integration of dealing with modern HVAC, electrical systems, plumbing, and problems with the house and working out to get the issue solved. So forth. So that's kind of my melding is, profession, my knowledge of constructions with my knowledge of historic preservation developed over time.
All right. So this podcast is about creativity. And I didn't tell Donald I was going to ask him this question, but where do you see creativity in your job, your role here?
Well, because I didn't come to this in the standard way with an education, and the problem I see with most educational programs do not prepare you for what you would face as managing a historic house museum. They may teach you about how to put on a educational program or about a certain subject dealing with preservation or history or, but they don't really teach you all aspects of it. So it's sometimes I have to be creative to get things done because we're also working in a local government setting that doesn't necessarily, that runs community centers, parks, and historic house museums. A lot of them own them. We own a number of this. Parks Department owns a number of them, but it's not always easy to get things done because you hire a plumber and you have to make them understand what they can do, what they can't do, and work with them to get it done. So there's a certain creativity that's different than the artistic or writing or so to speak. But that's kind of the best answer I can come with.
Oh, I can see where you'd have to be creative and really, unfortunately, creativity has been relegated to the artsy fartsy stuff, which I shouldn't say, but I see creativity all over the place here, and in what
limited budgets because
yes.
you have to try to do exhibits that I've done them. I've used my carpentry skills to make a number of exhibits on a shoestring that have worked. I think.
Well, thank you for being on our podcast today.
Thanks for listening. If you haven't figured it out yet, that Donald Graham and I share a name, my name being Barbara Graham Tucker, I'll tell the whole story now. That Donald is my younger brother by 2 years. It occurred to me a few years ago that siblings, assuming you grow up in the same family and are relatively close in age, know you longer and maybe better than anyone. When we were little, we were assumed to be twins, since to those outside the family, we looked alike. Blonde, blue-eyed, and close in age, so same size. I went to visit Donald and his wife Edna in July 2025 and wanted to get his take on the work he does. His wife Edna could do a whole episode herself because she works in fiber arts and teaches classes about what was done in that realm back then. So maybe I'll get her on at another time. Remember to help us with the GoFundMe page in the show notes. We are coming to the end of this season, so if you have any good ideas for guests, please let me know through the email on my website. As always, please go back and listen to some of my past guests. You will be glad you did. Until next time, discover creativity.